Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight for our special coverage of the Republican National Convention. I'm Brandis Friedman. Day 2 of the convention is kicking off in Milwaukee, and public safety is in the spotlight. And among the speakers tonight, we'll hear from a number of former President Donald Trump's primary opponents who are now backing him. Now we go out to Amanda Vinicky. She's kicking off our team coverage live at Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee, where the convention is taking place. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, this evening's convention is really just getting underway. Delegates, as you said, are set to hear from primary rival Nikki Haley, as well as Republican leaders of Congress, and then what the campaign is calling everyday Americans, particularly those who've been impacted by crime. The theme of tonight is making America safe once again. I asked Illinois' incoming Republican committeewoman what that means to her.
To have America safe, that it just means that, we can live and move about freely without the fear of having to look over our shoulders.
The newly adopted National Republican platform focuses a lot on crime that it blames on migrants crossing the southern border illegally. The platform calls for the largest deportation operation in American history and for stopping what it calls the migrant crime epidemic. The immigration also a chief concern for chair of Illinois' delegation to the RNC, Congresswoman Mary Miller.
The people coming over the border, we know they're trafficking drugs, they're human trafficking, they're number one breaking our laws. Terrorists are coming over the border. It's a dangerous time for our country. And I'm going to say it, I think it's treasonous of Joe Biden and his administration to open our borders and to violate our immigration laws.
Saturday's shooting of Trump at his rally in Pennsylvania highlights another public safety concern, gun violence. That's something that hasn't come up all that much so far here at the RNC, though we are, of course, going to be listening to tonight's speakers to see whether Chicago and its gun problems become a Republican talking point as they have for the former president in the past. There's something else that I spoke with members of Illinois' Republican delegation about at their morning meeting, asking, does that shooting of the attempted assassination of President Trump change their position on gun control from a policy perspective? A first-time delegate from Aurora says the answer is no.
I don't think that there's so much major that has to change, except for we have to start enforcing the laws. We seem to have gotten away from that and giving everybody a pass that if you want to steal $1,000, it's okay. If you want to walk into a store and walk out merchandise, we're not even going to call the cops. The cops aren't even going to show up. We got to get back to, broken windows. We got to get back to, just addressing the laws that are already on the books.
He says that the man who shot Trump was troubled and that there is no government policy at the state or federal level that can cure that. Other members of Illinois' delegation share that view and say that it's really a matter of doing more about mental health. Republican candidate for a seat in the Illinois House, Reagan Deering, says she stands firm in backing the Second Amendment.
I sleep better at night knowing that I have a lawful weapon in my home that will allow me to protect my family, my children, my home. But we do have criminals that are taking these weapons to the streets, and we see the numbers in Chicago. It's just heartbreaking. I wish that the governor would declare a state of emergency in Chicago.
Deering is a plaintiff in an unsuccessful lawsuit to reverse Illinois' ban on AR-15 weapons like the gun that was used to shoot Trump. None of the delegates that I interviewed said that they are interested, even after Saturday, in joining Democrats who have been calling for similar federal action to ban so-called assault weapons. Rather, many said that they were really excited to see Trump make a surprise appearance last night and that his showing up demonstrates his resilience, strength, and leadership. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Of course, we'll see you again a couple of times a bit later on in the show. The stakes of the 2024 presidential election are stark. especially for Chicago and its residents. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now from Milwaukee's riverfront with more. Heather, to hear Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson tell it, the prospect of former President Donald Trump returning to the White House represents an existential threat to Chicago and its residents. Tell us why.
Well, both Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson have told reporters that not only does former President Donald Trump pose a threat to American democracy, given his support for the participants in the January 6th Capitol insurrection, but also his continued lies about the 2020 election, but specifically for Chicagoans could find their rights curtailed significantly, making the former president's re-election campaign a dire threat for Chicagoans who rely on being able to get reproductive health care or gender-affirming care, or who simply want to be part of the fight against climate change. All of those issues would be directly in the president's sights, and he has said that he will roll back Democratic-led efforts on all of those issues.
Heather, Chicago Republican leaders, though, they told you that a second term for former President Trump would mean a return to the strong economy of 2019 before the pandemic hit. What do they think will make the difference?
Well, they say that those concerns about democracy and reproductive rights are overblown because Illinois has protections for all of those issues inside the state law. However, they say that Trump will extend the 2017 package of tax cuts he signed into law permanently, and that will not only encourage business creation, it will reduce unemployment, even though unemployment remains at historically low levels, but that it will help spread prosperity that can't help but help Chicago families now struggling to buy a house or to make their rent. And they say that is what is most important when people go to the polls in November.
Heather, when Trump was president, he frequently targeted Chicago. Remind us what that looked like.
Well, shortly after taking office in January 2017, he tweeted that he was prepared to, quote, send in the feds to address what he called horrible carnage in Chicago. In addition, he attempted to yank millions of dollars in public safety grants from the city because of its status as a self-proclaimed sanctuary city, which prohibits city officials, including police officers, from cooperating with immigration agents in deporting undocumented immigrants. Now, that effort was ultimately unsuccessful, but the president has vowed to redouble those efforts if elected to a second term. And as we heard Amanda said, he is promising the largest deportation effort in American history. And whether or not that will be successful, I think, is an open question. However, it will no doubt send Chicago's undocumented community into the shadows and make it harder for them to access city officials for fear of deportation.
Okay, Heather Sharon, and of course, we'll hear more from you as well as Amanda, and Nick Blumberg will join us as well in just a few minutes. Heather Sharon, thank you so much. But first, more about what the message of safety could look like among Republicans and what else to expect tonight. We're joined by Erik Nisbet, a policy analyst and communications professor at Northwestern University, where he also researches political violence and polling. Erik, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So as we've said, tonight's theme is Make America Safe once again. What are you expecting to hear tonight?
Well, these are key themes and actually the key logic of, Trump's original 2016 campaign was immigration, right? And if you look at the recent polling, Gallup says that the number of Americans that want to reduce immigration is at a 20-year high. So immigration as an issue, if that's one of the foci of tonight, that is a key benefit to the Republicans and part of Trump's logic of his campaign. You're also going to see they link immigration to gun violence, right, and crime, right? And so that will be sort of that fusion that we need to make America safer again by deporting migrants. And this sort of really lynches into the complete logic of who Donald Trump is.
Crime and violence can be a bread and butter issue for the GOP. Excuse me. Could tonight sway any voters in the battleground states like Wisconsin?
I think so, because immigration is one of the top issues that's polling on people's minds. And if you look at how people view Trump versus Biden on immigration, Trump has a natural advantage. So bringing more we talk about immigration, it hurts Biden. Now the numbers, since Biden's executive order reducing, closing the border crossings are some of the all-time low since Biden took office. But that doesn't really resonate with people. It's about the migrants who are already here. It's this linkage to crime. And I think that basically the more that Trump talks about immigration, the more it benefits him.
So, of course, you know, there may be some coded or even not so coded racial references tonight, both when talking about immigration, which came up a decent bit over the course of last night's speeches, but also urban violence, gun violence. What do you think we'll hear along those lines?
I think they're obviously not going to talk about guns being the problem. They're going to talk about democratic policing and issues. They're going to talk about issues around bail, for example, in Illinois as the problem. So as you heard in that clip, the broken windows thesis, that if we just crack down, especially on smaller crimes, then these larger gun violence will go away. And that's not really sort of accurate. And if you actually look at gun violence statistics overall, in terms of the size of our population in Chicago and in Illinois, actually on a per capita basis, gun violence is actually lower than many so-called red states. So we really need to think about this from a larger perspective. Yeah,
Republicans have often taken violence in a city like Chicago or in a blue state and blamed it on the fact that it is run by Democrats, and you know there's crime overrunning communities that are run by Democrats. Is that something we'll probably hear more of?
Probably more here tonight. I mean, I think you're going to hear about public safety. You're going to hear about sort of Republican unity, right? These are the two themes. You're also going to have Steve Scalise, House Majority Leader, who is himself a victim of political violence at a shooting, a congressional baseball game. So what he has to say will be very personally about that moment. So I see that will probably be one way they'll connect the tragic events of Saturday to Trump and also speak from the heart about this.
And to that end, you know, like you said, we're expecting to hear a lot of personal stories today from some of the speakers, including, you know, one of their own, Representative Steve Scalise, as you said, but so-called everyday Americans. Right. How will those stories sort of play into the Republican messaging?
I think often our peers, everyday people, are powerful messengers, right? They're more credible. They're talking about their personal experiences rather than a policy position. So that's why they're highlighting and interweaving it with the various political leaders they're showing off tonight.
This, of course, you know, this all comes on the heels of the assassination attempt over the weekend of former President Trump, making a strong showing last night, the first night of the RNC. How does all of this sort of position him in the eyes of the party and set up, you know, unfortunately, set up their convention for this week and going forward?
Trump's messaging for the last couple of years is that he is being persecuted for the Republicans. They're going after me, and I'm here for you. Right? That he's a martyr. Now he can say that I'm literally a martyr. I took a bullet for you. I am here to be your shield. And I will sort of save you and represent you. And that sort of really plays in, that event totally plays into his narrative that he's been communicating for the last 18 months.
Okay, so we'll probably hear some more of that this week as well. Erik Nisbet, I know you're going to stick around and hang out with us and talk to our whole team in a few minutes. And so we'll see you then. Don't go anywhere. But first, we go back to Fiserv Forum and Amanda Vinicky with Chuck Hernandez, Chicago GOP Chair. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, this is a position that Mr. Hernandez just took over in May, but really your longtime job was 28 years with the Chicago Police Department, most of which as a detective. So something that we hear a lot about from Republican delegates here is that one of the issues at the root of crime in Illinois and Chicago in particular is status as a sanctuary city. So I'm curious, how has that impacted police work? Where do you see that come up?
Yeah, well, I've seen it come up in my career when we had our police stations full of migrants sleeping on the floor. We had, you know, we have enough work as policemen working in our city trying to combat crime, and then having, throwing into the mix these migrants really...
basically becoming a homeless shelter.
Yes,
you're saying.
That's right.
Was there any cause of crime, though? We heard from Congresswoman and chair of the delegation today that she believes migrants are terrorists and committing crimes, gun violence.
No, I don't believe that's the case as far as that, but we do need to have a secure make our country secure, our neighborhoods secure. We need to know who lives in our communities. And unfortunately, most Americans do things the right way. Most immigrants come here and do things the right way. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening right now.
Chicago also has a reputation, one referenced by President Trump, for really having an issue with gun violence despite gun control measures in place in the city and state. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that the federal government would be wise to adopt, and a broader approach could curb gun violence?
Well, I would like to see our partners with the ATF, FBI, Department of Justice come into Chicago and help us curb this violence epidemic, what's happening in Chicago. Over the 4th of July weekend, we had over 100 shot, 20 murdered on our streets. This is unacceptable, but we can't just keep saying it's unacceptable. We need our partners at the federal level to come in and give us assistance.
If President Trump were to be elected, what do you believe he could do about it?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Having a renewed commitment with the Department of Justice, because what's happening right now in Cook County is that we don't have a true prosecutor that's committed to strongly prosecuting crime, and the criminal knows it, and the criminal has the upper hand right now. We need the Trump administration right now more than ever to make Chicago safe again.
How would the Trump administration change what the Cook County Prosecutor's Office is doing?
Yes. So I was a detective for 28 years. I took some cases federal with, at the Dirksen Federal Building. You do 85% of that federal sentence. That word gets out on the street that we are prosecuting crimes federally, and fear goes out to the street, and they will know that we mean business. We need to curb the violence. We need Donald Trump in the White House.
Thank you very much for your time again, just as of May. So congratulations, Chuck Hernandez, chair of the Cook County GOP. Back to you,
Thank you.
All right, Amanda, thank you. And of course, our thanks to Chuck Hernandez. And we're back in a moment with more from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
It is day 2 at the RNC. We get local reaction to Trump's VP pick. Democrats make a visit to Wisconsin, and Illinois Republicans get some advice as they attempt to increase their power in the state. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Nick Blumberg. Well, when I say here, I mean Milwaukee. We are also joined once again by Northwestern University's Erik Nisbet. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. Amanda, to you first. As we know, President Donald Trump announced Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his vice presidential pick. And we heard some reaction from Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. Tell us more.
Yes, Brandis. Durbin and others really are critical of Vance for saying that you put a priority on curbing crime. Again, that is the theme of tonight's convention. And yet they say that he is sort of hurting Chicago being able to do something about it by leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois, responsible, of course, for dealing with many gun crimes, gang violence, and political prosecution as well, leaving that without a permanent leader because Vance blocked Biden's nomination of April Perry to that job continually. Let's hear from Durbin himself.
Why would he want to stop career prosecutors from moving forward to protect us? He was very clear about it. It was retribution for the weaponization of the Department of Justice toward Donald Trump. It was strictly a political move. It had nothing to do with the merits of the nominees or the needs to fill those positions. That does not give me a lot of hope in terms of what his politics mean for a lot of people who are looking for law and order all across the United States.
So there is an individual in that position, an acting U.S. attorney, so it's not as if the position is completely vacant. Nonetheless, without a permanent leader, by the way, Perry is set to become, or on the path anyway, to become a federal judge now, is appointed by Biden. That would come with a lifetime appointment as opposed to the U.S. attorney's position that she had been set to become the first woman to hold out of the Northern District of Chicago, when that would be subject to the whims of whoever is in power in the White House.
Nick Blumberg, the guest speaker at this morning's Illinois delegation breakfast, had a message that might sound surprising coming from a Republican politician. Tell us more about that.
He sure did. That was former Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York. Zeldin unsuccessfully challenged New York Governor Kathy Hochul in 2022. Now, a lot of Republicans in Illinois and around the country have been really critical of proposed and passed laws to expand voter access, things like early voting or mail-in ballots. But Zeldin urged Illinois Republican delegates to take a more pragmatic approach. Here's what he had to say.
Every state in the country should have voter ID. Ballot harvesting should not be legal in any state. Universal mail-in balloting should not be legal in any state. But when the Democrats change an election law in a particular state, and it is the law for that election, I believe that we should be leaning into that law instead of boycotting that law.
So essentially, take advantage of laws even if you don't like them instead of sitting on the sidelines. Zeldin also talked about during his campaign visiting solidly blue districts, trying to make inroads with Black and Latino and Asian voters in particular. You know, he said consultants, political types told him, don't bother going there. You're never going to win. They always vote Democratic. But what he said is those are the exact kinds of places that Republicans should be campaigning. Now, of course, Zeldin's campaign wasn't successful, so maybe the jury's out on that approach, but certainly he was encouraging Republicans in Illinois not to just sit on the sidelines, even though they are in the minority.
Interesting approach, Nick. Heather, it's been 72 hours, of course, since the assassination attempt on former President Trump. What has changed since then?
Ended with a press conference here in Milwaukee, headlined by New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who really tried to refocus the campaign against Trump on Project 2025. So we've talked a lot tonight about that massive deportation effort that Trump has promised. That is part of Project 2025, which lays out sort of a 180-day mandate for when Trump or the next conservative president takes office. And that is really what Democrats are hoping will sort of help communicate to not just the people of Chicago, not just the people of Illinois, but in swing states, sort of what is at stake in this election. It is a sweeping document that would really reorient the federal government. It would mean a lot of changes for gay and lesbian and transgender Americans. And that's the argument that the Biden campaign wants to have. They would like to stop focusing so much on the president's debate, on his age, his verbal stumbles, and they're hoping now that the danger of the attempted assassination is past, they can get back to those issues.
All that said, Erik Nisbet, how does having survived an assassination attempt, how does that make it difficult for Democrats, or how do they have to reconfigure how they go on the attack against Trump?
The logic of the Biden campaign has been that Trump is a threat to democracy. He's an existential threat. And that type of language, that type of focus has to be put on pause for a while. They might try to pivot. They might focus on 2025 as sort of a venue, as an indirect way to make that argument. But most people are not focused on democracy on the ballot. They're focused on issues right now. If you look at what people care about, it's the economy, it's immigration, it's inflation, and it's abortion. So one way they might pivot on some battleground states is focus on abortion rights, for example, motivate people. It's hard to motivate people right now about democracy being the ballot, and it's hard to use language or rhetoric that attacks Trump directly as a threat, because they'll just be pointed at, oh, you're inciting violence. They'll point to blame. It becomes a blame game. And then it's, okay, well, and also Trump being a victim of political violence almost undercuts that idea that he's a threat to democracy, like singularly.
Okay. Heather, we've got about 30 seconds left. We're going to hear from a Chicagoan tonight on the Republican stage.
That's right. The Reverend Corey Brooks, who's been on our show a number of times, will deliver the closing prayer to tonight's session. He, of course, is best known as the rooftop pastor. He spent the better part of 2 years living on a roof in Woodlawn to raise money for a new church and a community center. He is a Republican, and he says he's been targeted by those views. He is exactly the kind of person the Republicans are hoping to showcase in this convention tonight.
All right, lots for all of us to look at. I look forward to watching it. We'll be back here to talk about it later on. Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, Nick Blumberg, and of course, Erik Nisbet from Northwestern. Thank you so much for joining us. And that is our show for now. Please be sure to join us for more live convention coverage tonight at 10 p.m. We will break down day 2 of the Republican National Convention with in-depth analysis from our team. In the meantime, be sure to check out our website for live blog covering the very latest news from the convention, and that is, of course, at WTTW.com/news. Stay right there now for convention coverage from PBS NewsHour. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night. And we'll see you.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its founder and senior partner, Robert Clifford, who ranked #1 in the state of Illinois by Super Lawyers Top 10 2024 Illinois Super Lawyers List.